I would like to welcome everybody for coming to our first night of the Ketel One Creative Talks this evening with Rolf Sachs, Harry Richardson and Claire Page from Committee. The intention of the talks is to create a dialogue which is both sort of informal and critical, sort of to introduce a level of criticality back to design discourse. And this is something that kind of with the speed in which the industry operates at these days might get overlooked. So we've invited down designers between now and October to have a conversation that is sort of agendaless and discusses criticality, and that's whether it's sort of criticism in regards to, you know, morality and humanity, that design should demonstrate or support social responsibility through an attempt to improve the human condition, or whether it's the more romantic version of criticism, kind of Herbert Muskamp describing Bilbao as it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, it's a ship, an artichoke, the miracle of the rose. And it's that type of lyricism in which I'd first thought about Rolf, and then of course he'd led me to Harry and Claire. So both design groups are ones that I'd consider as multidisciplinary, highly academic. They're representing a zeitgeist. And one word that I particularly like is boundaryless. Rolf has had a studio in London for over 20 years, exploring design and art, and has shown in, you know, the largest institutions in the world, including a show that's recently opened at MAC called Typisch Deutsch, which I'm sure they'll talk about this evening. And Harry and Claire met studying fine art in London many years ago, and in 2001 started a committee, which was a combination of practicing design, art, and craft. So with that, I think that's probably a good place to start a very boundaryless conversation. So please join me in welcoming everyone tonight.
So first, good evening, everybody. Is that a good... Well, I don't know how close I should go. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for coming to having a little discussion here. And thank you, everybody here in the audience, for coming. And now we can start to bore you for the next 45 minutes.
Yes, and if you... I mean, it's such a... Forgetting the microphones, if these weren't here, then it would be actually quite a nice informal affair. Genuinely informal affair, perhaps, but... So please do pipe up if you have any better questions than we might together have, I don't know, or answers indeed. But yeah, we received a message from Katie about Typisch Deutsch 2 days ago, and I was unfamiliar with that project and just wanted to... I mean, I have my own personal interest in getting to know Germany. I've just only recently been on a holiday there for the first time in all my life, and so I was wondering if you could introduce it to us and actually allow us to learn about...
Yeah, Typisch Deutsch was an exhibition I already planned since probably 5 years. It is on my mind. It had to do very much that I saw from abroad that the perception of Germany changing. Obviously, we had very dark clouds historically over the nations, and rightly so. And but one could see how the thing changed. It started probably already with the World Championships in Germany, where people took very great pride already in their country, and also the world saw Germany in a different way. A very key point was also probably when Christo wrapped up the Reichstag. It was very symbolic. It was a change. On top of it, Eastern Germany now coming back to Western Germany. And I think the nation in itself took more self-pride, and also the surrounding countries and the world was accepting Germany more than perhaps it was in the 45, 50 years since the Second World War. And since then, of course, a lot of things have happened. Germany was economically very strong, is sort of the locomotive of the EU. And Germany also took a very, very special position in the arts. I think that Germany's arts were probably the strongest in the second part of the 20th century in Europe. If you compare, for instance, France, who was omnipresent in the early part of the 20th century, which now actually doesn't have one major, figure in the art world, where you have Germans like Beuys, Richter, Polke, Rosemarie Trockel, and many more, who are sort of omnipresent in the art scene and which really have defined contemporary art. There is a little interesting dimension also, because you asked me about Switzerland before. If the people who don't know me, I'm German origin, but I was brought up in Switzerland, and my family, we all have also Swiss passports. Now, what is interesting to see also the difference that in the arts between Switzerland and Germany is that Switzerland also has a huge presence in the art world with Fischli and Weist and Siegner and Urs Fischer and Pipilotti Rist. What is interesting to see is that the Swiss, who normally are not known for their great humor, all their artists have great humor, where the Germans are sort of very, very serious. It's quite interesting to see, but it is probably that the Swiss try to edge against this sort of narrow-mindedness a little bit, which they have, and laugh about themselves, which they probably can do quite well. What happened basically is very surprising, is that the dominant art countries in the beginning of the century were all more or less Catholic, the Catholic world, and now at the moment it is more the Protestant world who is the omnipresence. England also, who is very important now since 30 years in the contemporary art. And of course there's America was always very important, and the Jewish world. And so, because of this change, I wanted to do was preparing this exhibition. Originally it was supposed to be a gallery exhibition, and then I was invited by the Museum for Applied Arts from Cologne. And basically, in the studio we worked that we took a lot of the typical German cliches and also the German sort of emotional terms, philosophical terms, which are very strongly associated with Germany. And with that, we did objects, furniture, sculpture, installations, and had also objects done to represent, what exactly is the inner soul of the Germans. And like mostly in my work with a lot of the pieces, I also took a humorous approach, which is important because of course it is a serious talk, and it is very, very dangerous to wander out, trying to define, what exactly is the German soul. What came out is an interesting show. What is more interesting than that, and what really is the point, and I think that is something we will discuss also, is that one discovers that in our small Europe, each country is built by a very, very specific fiber. And it is surprising how that has evolved in history, although we are so close to each other. And even England was basically founded nearly through a migration which came from Germany at the time, but still developed then in a very, very different ways. Why is this? Is this only genes? Is it sociological? Is it educational? Is it, what really defines the environment? And that is something quite fantastic to see, that everything is very distinct. And even today, where we all mix and where we all have total communication and we know what the others think and do, and similar politics, similar policies, we have the EU. Each nation has their own character. And that is something beautiful, and it is something which I don't believe will change. It will stay like this, and each one of the fibers has advantages. The Germans are serious, they are punctual, they are perhaps less funny, they can't perhaps that much laugh about themselves, but the country works.
This is true, is it?
And it is true. And I think, you know, I mean, of course, you have to generalize it always, yeah? You can't you always have exceptions, yeah? And the Brits would certainly say that the French don't have any humor, yeah, because that is enemy number one. And the French probably don't have humor, but they have something. They have esprit. They have a certain spiritual wit, yeah, which is their sense of humor and which defines them, yeah. And they have certainly a sort of natural arrogance because they were the king of the world at one point. Yeah.
They're prepared to have an opinion as well, aren't they? I think us English find it very hard to have an opinion, I think.
Yeah, there always are, of course, opinionated. No, and it came, of course, that is quite historically easy to explain, because for a few centuries, everybody tried to copy the French. Yeah, everybody tried to copy the French courts. Everybody tried to copy the French style. Each sort of leading families in countries were speaking French. Yeah, that was the sort of intellectual thing to do. And the English, they have something, of course, fantastic. First, they have a certain ease with themselves because they can laugh. They can laugh about themselves. Then they have something which is quite fantastic, that they developed this sort of very individual spirits because they were the first people who could afford to think about leisure, to think about other things which are not work.
Because of wealth.
And because of the wealth. You had the Commonwealth, and it was in the 19th century that every sport, the club, the card games, the, you know, most...
and that was that entry to the absurd, then? That was...
that is the great thing, that through that, of course, developed a fantastic eccentricity. Something, for instance, which a German would have great difficulty doing, because we are much too... The Germans would be much too cautious, yeah. Where the English are sort of, they have much more courage. If they fail, they fail. It's not seen that, you know, as that bad. And there's also a huge difference. For instance, the English are punters; they bet, yeah. A German or a Swiss would never bet. He would be very, very careful. And this is still today like this. If you look at even the Anglo-Saxon banking world compared to the German one, yeah, the Anglo-Saxons are probably, you know, more aggressive and more successful, at least in good times.
Yeah, well, if you think of the British nation as well being naval, that's a huge risk. That's a land that operates through risk by travelling to other parts of the world they don't know, and that was a massive part of our early culture, I think. Yeah, and so.
But it is changing, though, isn't it? I mean, it's got to change. I mean, I remember I was reading how an ambassador from Flanders was in the court of Henry VIII and was remarking on how we were all kissing the whole time here. Far too much, he thought. And so what I mean is we wouldn't think of ourselves as great kissers now, perhaps. I don't know, maybe you would, but I think possibly
some of these symbols rotate around and between the cultures, and we have to pick apart what is fundamental, perhaps, from those things. But what strikes me as interesting about you addressing this subject is that it feels quite brave, because I think we've been through a period of political correctness, especially this country has had its wave of political correctness. So it's interesting that you're prepared to try and talk about stereotypes, which I think people are quite frightened to do. We're frightened to do it because we have significant immigration across Europe, and so that makes it harder for us to talk about difference, for fear that actually some of those feelings are negative ones. And so I think it's very interesting to try and do that, because actually Europe has a really special mission now, because it is a global group, that has to play its role as a global in the globe. And I think that means coming to terms with our identities and the way they rub together between us is really important, actually. So it's, I guess, an interesting question then is to address what the role of art, design, cultural activity has. How much can it achieve in assisting that investigation and that collaboration, I guess.
It's like a big brick wall, basically. Each one has to bring in a little bit of brick. And I said very often, this exhibition is one little, in German we say Quäntchen, a little quantum of things which put together, to basically straighten out again the picture what Germany should be and how it is and truly should its value. What is interesting is that, of course, Germany had classic cliches where people were always sort of laughing at, or they took a little the mickey on, on these things. Oh, the Germans are so punctual, and they're so clean, and they're so precise, and they're bookkeepers, and so on. And which is probably right, they are, but today it's a necessity for everybody, and you can't anymore in the world competitiveness. Not be like this. So everybody has to adapt, to these values, which were still not, not as important in the 19th century. So I think that also makes a big difference, that.
So we've had our leisure time in Europe. We've had our free run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And actually, do you think those characteristics take on almost a glamour because they are winning?
Characteristics
those
of win.
Characteristics.
No, I think
punctuality
they
becomes
are.
almost
if
exciting.
you look at, it's in the competitive world, and if you look over at America, which is now the biggest, the totally mixed world, they took certainly a lot of these atouts. They took, from a German side, and they took from all, different countries. They picked, the strengths which each country had. And each of our countries had, fantastic. The Italians is a state where nothing functions. It's a state of individualism, but the whole thing together,
But some of the richest living you would find anywhere in Europe, I think, is developed in Italy. Some of the finest.
And it's, and they have a fantastic style, and they're very, they also don't mix that much with the rest of Europe, actually. We see them everywhere, and it's omnipresent, and probably the best language to speak in the world is Italian, because anywhere you go, you have an Italian restaurant, and you'll find a friend. And but it is in their world, also in the business world and so on. They're very much, within their own country, because they function in their own thing. They have a very special fiber, and even if the state doesn't work like this, the whole country, is actually, doing fine over the centuries. Actually, it is doing incredibly fine over the centuries.
And so these symbols that you've created, are they there to be questioned, or are you asking a question with that? I presume you are.
A lot of people ask me that question, and I don't think it really is to ask a question. Is this perhaps a reflection?
Okay.
And I think the Germans who themselves went to see the shows, they were analyzing themselves. Oh yeah, is that right? Do I see that like this? Does it fit to me? And I think most would say, oh yes, I can see that is a fiber that defines me. I realized much stronger that I'm actually, my roots are German, because of this exhibition I did. Before, very often people ask me, what are you? And I would say I'm European, I'm half German, half French thing. But, I realized that my inner self is probably the most, quite strongly German, and it's a direct reflection. And there's also another interesting thing. I only lived for very few years, actually, in Germany. And between I was 3 to 8 that I lived fully in Germany. Of course, I was always in touch with Germany. But I think to do an exhibition like this, you have to feel unbelievably strong, the country and how people are. And I live here now in this country since 20 years. I couldn't do a show like this on England. I couldn't do a show on French, even though I'm half French. perhaps I would tempt to do it for the Swiss, because I've really lived there a long time and I was in school there. But you had to feel this fiber underneath your nails, we say, it's a German saying. Yeah, underneath your nails to really be able to make a show like this. And, you know, that you targeted well. That's why I think the pieces at the end we had in the show are not so much a question, oh yeah, is it like this? But I think it's just a reflection. And it helps, I think, the nation and the people also to see, oh yeah, we are different. We are like this.
And then I guess it's for each viewer as well to accept or reject your version. And and
I mean, I hope that the show comes to London, because of course English and Germans, they always had a difficult relationship, and for a long time I always say in the papers, one had the feeling what sells is sex and the Third Reich. I think it has become, it has become, there has been a vast improvement, and every German ambassador who comes to the UK, that is one of the issues he addresses, and especially also the educational issue. And I have two of my sons here who were in school here in England, and the only real history they learned in school was about the Third Reich, but nothing, before and after, which is, sort of,
or even
it is still a cliche, and it shouldn't be like this.
Yeah, or even about the troubles of British Empire, which are, I think there's probably not a European nation that shouldn't question its own nationalistic pride every day. All the while, it's something that's is good practice for any country, actually, and it's very easy for the Brits to rely on the observation of other people's nationalistic pride, but actually we all have. It's a obligation to maintain our own zone, I think, vigilantly, really.
And do you think? I'm just interested as you make this review. You said review, was it? Or reflection, sorry, reflection. Thinking about with your work that you, and just thinking, maybe drawing some kind of comparison with our own work and this reliance on existing objects and forms, and whether, how much satisfaction comes from these interjections of the world as it is, rather than creating something new. And sorry, it's changing the subject a bit, but I'm just interested from my own point of view as well.
I think it's a good idea, because otherwise we have a political discussion.
Whether, do you ever find that unsatisfying, that you feel that there's this, is there a responsibility to make a new mark?
It's quite an interesting question, which comes up the whole time, and especially in our studio, because I have some of my colleagues here sitting, is we really try to create objects which have a certain emotion. And if you're a pure designer, it is basically something which is very close to the craft and to the shape giving, to a production process. So as a pure designer, you try to create new shapes, which are visually perhaps more modern, but even more important, which you can probably build faster, cheaper, which are environmentally responsible, which you can stack, which you can withhold stronger things. And that is really what is your preoccupation. And for us, and I see myself definitely much more an artist at soul than a designer. I like the functional object, because I think a functional object has also something, it always has been a little bit the stepchild between the arts and architecture. So I think there is still a lot to do. And in the functional object, what was always the preliminary point was that it was supposed to be decorative, to have a certain style. So we are trying to do objects with an attitude. If it's an emotional attitude, perhaps an intellectual attitude, yeah, that means it's a new thought, how you can put things together. And I think that this is also something which the market more and more wants. Yeah, they want something which has another meaning, yeah, which has, you know, a deeper thought to it, and it can be humorous, it can be erotic, it can be surprising, yeah, intriguing, and so on. And that, of course, is a world one can't even say from where is the influences. Yeah, it's not as strict, orderly thought process like design would be. It is something you take. I just thinking now, it's the worst thing is always to describe one's own work and so on. And I think I'm just going to now, when people ask me about the work, just make a list of 15 words which might have influenced me. Yeah, which you know, to do that object, one can't say, oh, why, you know, why is it? And if one can say it, probably it still comes too strongly out of the head, and it should come more out of the guts. And I always say that is my creative process. I have to work slowly from my head to my guts, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't know where I am, but somewhere between probably 4 and 6, yeah, and I hope to reach 8. And someone like Rauschenberg probably reached 10. Yeah, and it is a fantastic and an incredible beauty to be able to think so free, to detach yourself from, you know, our environment, from what people think, from what thing, and that is at the end what art wants to do. They want that people think freer, that they're more tolerant, that we're open, that we can understand, other people, because at the end, the most important thing is that we will get along. And that is the beauty of life then. And, you know, I mean, we were discussing this morning the problem we have now with all the different religious factions, but Islam, it is difficult. It is sort of counterproductive to that. And with the arts, with the things, it's, you know, that is somewhere, I think, the ultimate goal we have to try to achieve. And like you said before, it's all little pieces, bit by bit, which hopefully will make us reach this goal, which is probably an idealistic goal, but we should have to continue trying to reach it.
That's the state of an artist, I think, is continually trying to reach something that isn't easily available, or if at all. But for our own part, our work, I think, rests somewhere between art and design, and for similar reasons, I think, because we trained as artists, we work in the design field, but very often making objects that are of no use whatsoever, because we want to actually discuss material culture at the same time as actually providing it and offering it. And I think we view just about the material objects outside and around us are a little bit like a kind of vision of our insides. They're the detritus of humankind, and I think we could benefit from being archaeologists that don't look back to, you know, our kind of past eras, but have a look at our own material culture with the same eye that we might observe the Romans, of how successful they were at, looking after their rubbish dumps, for example, and which they had trouble with even. So I think we kind of would benefit from that kind of approach, and so we actually try to analyse these things and then bring them forward and to make some qualitative decisions about what the objects we make. And so in a way we make art, but only about design, because we feel it's the place that is in most need of discussing, actually, and observing.
But you mean because it's if art is about trying to locate some truths, then there's a short supply of them.
Yes,
is that what you mean?
Absolutely. I think it's very hard to tell the truth about our material world. I think we rarely know, exactly what cloth we're wearing, where it was made, how it came out of the earth, how it was formed, the cost to other people to produce it, to bring it to us. We know so little about this
magic.
Yeah, these things are conjured, and our main experience of them is on the shop shelf, where obviously there's an agent who needs to tell us the very best about this object. So we're particularly interested in finding about the absolute truth of an object, which is its legacy after we've discarded it, it's where it came from, it's who made it, it's the hands that shaped it or the machine that shaped it, and whether it has enriching properties that are actually quite hard to define, things that make our soul happy, things that make us, efficient, things that change our being as we use them. And I think there's an awful lot of objects which actually leave us feeling a little bit worse, actually. When with it.
The dynamic of efficiency, I think, is a very... it changes, doesn't it? There must be a graph, a line can be plotted where efficiency you gain, and then suddenly it stops, and suddenly, like an ingrowing nail, it actually stops one's experience.
Things lose their richness. So for us, it's about trying to discover the richness of life through our material culture, and I think that really doesn't require any boundaries between art and design to operate when you try to look for that richness of experience, I think.
No, I think that blends it very much, because it is, of course, an emotional thing, and also you want the materials you use to have a great trustfulness. That they're very authentic, they're very beautiful, and there we certainly are moving in a direction which is quite nice. We like to know exactly what we use. We want to use it also. We come back to older materials because they were environmentally friendlier than before, but still there's a lot of new things also coming, but that is certainly sort of a base of the true thing, which also we use that in the beginning. You already have to have a trustworthiness and authenticity in the material you use, that at the end the object can also be authentic. Yeah. And what I was saying also before, because you were saying about making shapes, making new shapes, inventing new shapes, new ways of making things and so on, and what we both have in similarity, and we don't know each other. We once had pieces at the same show, but we never really met. But I saw a lot of similarity, and it is that we always use, older objects, existing shapes, and sort of transform them. This has, of course, something which has to do, again, very strongly with emotion, and has to do with nostalgia. And we are extremely strongly influenced by what we saw and felt as a child, in our formative years as a youngster, and one has a much stronger relationship to these objects. And this is not only in objects, this is in taste, it's in places we see, it is friends we make, it all has very strongly its roots from where we originally come from. And most people then always, they go out in the world and they work all over the place and so on, and then at the end of their life they come back to their roots.
But that's also thinking of your description of the pure designer searching for the new. I think actually it's actually there's a dark art at work to some degree, because it's always a dialogue with our nostalgia and our memories. And I always think of car design as possibly the zenith, the absolute zenith of this dark art, of how the new is slowly kind of, given to us, but through this very deep appreciation of this need for recognition. And it's that's an industry that can't afford to fail. It cannot afford to fail. The investment is too big. And so I kind of, as an outsider, I am in awe of the powers at work, but I also feel so so depressed by how it comes to us, and that we, stride onwards towards it.
It's delivered ready.
It's so beautifully baked.
Yeah. In car design, there's a classic. I remember years ago, I was also on we had a round table discussing, and there was one car designer, and for instance, they made a car, and then on the side they made these shark fins, which were the old days, they needed it for the air flaps. There's no necessity whatsoever for it. They put it there just because people remembered that as a child.
Yeah.
And they say it immediately changes how the person perceives the object. Yeah, and it is interesting to see this, little intricacies, my God, breaking my tongue here. Yeah, but no, it is even in the most modern world to see, where, you need, where these things play a role.
Can I just take this opportunity, because of your kind of Swiss-German nationality, and having just talked about the ready-made and about humour and working against what might be established ideas, just wanting to ask you your what you think of Dada, because that was Swiss-German, wasn't it?
I think Dada originated in France, I think. Okay. And it was first in literature and then went into the arts. But of course, Dada is something which is very close to me. And I'm sort of, all the things which influenced me is certainly Suprematism, the Russian avant-garde, which were the beginning really of modernism. I read the other day, and it's quite contradictory. They're actually not constructivists. One shouldn't say that. Yeah. And academically, I have to myself come to grips with it. And then Dada, and of course the surreal words which came from that. And I believe that the surreal world is still a wonderful world, because it really opens up, ideas which are, not in our common environment, and push us to do things which are seen as quirky or unusual. And I believe that a lot of movements now, that we have a much more free thinking. You have to think that before the 19th century, everything had to be Baroque or Gothic, and everything was very, very implanted. Today, it is all free, and also the study, if you study arts at the university, it is very free, where before you were very doctrined by one of the professors and so on. And, that is something,
So what's the job of the anti-art of the Dada spirit now? I mean,
I think it is still around, and there's still artists now which use Dada ideas, and I certainly use love certain ideas from that, where one is influenced, and I think it is a continuous movement. They're perhaps a little bit changed, and I don't know. Even the work of Fischler and Weiss, it's just seeing things in a totally different way, showing things which are quite banal, but which give them a totally different perception. Have you actually thought about all these magazine covers? What is the message they want to give to you? And putting them into very, very simple objects, that the perception of that is just, totally different. And Duchamp, it's the classic. He made the famous, I don't even want to talk about the pissoir now, which is a thing, but for instance, he made the bicycle wheel on the little stand, which is now imprinted in all our heads, and we find it thing, and we still laugh about it today, and it still frees us. And we see other objects like the famous champagne holder he had. Every time someone sees it somewhere, one thinks, oh yeah, it's sort of closer to art. It has a certain perception for us, which warms our heart, which we like. And that is something beautiful, if someone can do and show something in an environment, in a intellectual thought, that one really changes the perception how one visually sees something. It is like it's modernism. It's when the first modernist houses were built, you know, a lot of people thought, oh my God, this is terrible. Yeah, and only the most advanced and most educated people in the field really accepted it and saw that it was something special. Today, for us, you know, we see these things when it's well done, and we say, well, this is really superb. This is a very clean language. Very unfortunately, this is only the best architecture which survives like this. A lot of architecture actually never reaches that goal, and we never get used to that, to the aesthetics. And yeah, that's why, I mean, at the moment, the sort of flavor of the month for me is I like design which comes from the craftsman, because the old houses were built from craftsmen, and they were built because they had to be built like this, and then perhaps someone decorated it a little bit because that was a different world. And I always make the example, Mercedes didn't have a design team in the 50s. It was actually the production line and the directors who made the car design. Yeah. Today, undoubtedly, a lot of people would say what some of the most beautiful models of Mercedes were these out of the 50s and 60s. And so when a craftsman does something, it has a reason why it is done like this, and it's not just invented out of thin air.
It's a, you know, we call it truth to materials, honesty in design, or, you know, just the straightforward elegance of having one goal and achieving it. And I think that's where the advertising world has so much to answer for, because as soon as they step into the middle of that process and change it, we lose something very very charming.
But it's the truth of need, isn't it? That's the point. There is what is the vernacular now? It's unattainable. We can't reach it.
I was going to say nobody said the awful word postmodernism yet. We've done really well to get this far, I have to say, but without saying that, and I don't. But you know that the postmodernism, which is you know we can't bear it. But you know, but nevertheless, a situation exists where we do find it very hard to decide what's worth doing anymore, and to decide what's for the best. And actually, we give up because it's so difficult to answer those questions, and we just...
It's too complicated.
We rely on the glamour of a consumer society to do it for us.
History will tell us.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I can't wait. I can't wait. I need to know now.
Yeah.
No, it is really a very... it's a difficult question. I mean, it's, you know, there are a lot of things which are done now and which... we probably also preoccupy ourselves with form giving and shaping and design and architecture and art, which we wouldn't agree. And I catch myself very often that I say, oh, I don't like that, and then I think about it again. And in the morning when I wake up, I think about the thing, and I say, I have some, you know, I'm too closed in my mind, to think about it. So you know, you have to catch yourself and push yourself also to new boundaries. I think we bored everybody a long time now. No. I think it's quite enough.
Well done, Rolf. That was
some of the eyes are already closing. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.